going on, everybody? It is your host, The Doghouse, with The Doghouse Show. We are on podcast number 4. Actually, I think it's 3. I think I messed up. I'm bad with numbers. This is what happens with us Republicans. We're terrible at numbers, okay? But look, we're back with another great episode of The Doghouse Show. I'm excited for y'all. We got another great guest here with us. His name is Lefty Philosophy. He's coming over here from YouTube, kind of merging those two things. And like I said, guys, I'm really excited. We'll get to all the other great news and stuff like that later on. But let's go ahead and hear from Lefty Philosophy, man. Welcome onto the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, what you kind of lean, I would assume, by your name. We kind of figure where you're coming from. But tell us a little bit about yourself, man.
Yeah, my name's Lefty Philosophy. You can just call me LP for short. I do lean on the left on many issues, but I take pragmatic approaches to a lot of things. So, like, I'm pro-gun, but, you know, we have our differences on the premises of pro-gun and stuff like that. I'm an Army combat veteran as well. I served in Iraq. I'm a Purple Heart veteran. Not saying that to get clout, but so you know from my side of things that, like, I do come from some experience in that world as well.
Oh, well, and thank you for your service, man. I mean, it's when you told me that, I was like, man, this is really an awesome experience. And it's really interesting, too, because a lot of military members that I've seen typically, are pretty right. You know, I mean, they lean right and stuff like that. So it's really interesting to see that, you know, you lean left. And there's nothing wrong with that, like I said, you know. So
And like, I didn't even start changing the way I thought until I got out of the military. So when I was in the military, I was super conservative.
Yeah. I mean, that's really cool, man. Well, and again, thank you for serving. So we're going to jump in here, meat and bones, guys. As far as viewers go, you're probably wondering, why is there not a little message down at the bottom that says we'll answer chat at 8? Well, guys, it's 9 o'clock. So what we're doing is it's a little late stream. So, you know, we're going to go ahead and interact with chat throughout the podcast. Okay, so it's going to be about an hour long, maybe an hour and a half. We're getting to a really meaty topic here that's going to take a lot of time anyway. So, you know, if y'all have any questions or anything, feel free to pop in here. It's a little bit outside of our normal kind of vibe here. But welcome in, Sad Sauce. Welcome in, Toxic Blood. Sad Sauce, yes, man. Purple Heart is big, so I agree. So what we're here to talk about is the Green New Deal and climate change. I will not lie. I've read through the Green New Deal. It's been a little bit. I had to do a little bit of a refresher before we go live. Oh, my dog just took off her gun. Give me 1 second. Come here. I just tried to get it off. Come here. Come here. Hey, come here.
Well,
hey.
At least he wears pants during these shows.
You're not gonna like. Come here. Hey. Oh, crazy dog, man. She does not like the cone, and she tried ripping it off with every possible might because she has like a UTI or whatever, and so anyways, it's a long story. Sad. Hey, man, look, the dog's crazy, bro. Tonight is a special night. You remember to wear pants. Yes, I did. Toxic. I wore pants today. So climate change. Go ahead and give me your first take on climate change, if you will, Lefty. LP. I'll call you LP.
I have a weird approach. Like, one, I don't necessarily care if climate change is happening or not, because that's not my approach. I usually look at this through like an economic lens, right? So even if climate change wasn't real, what would be the harm of switching to new sources of renewable energy or anything else, and opening up new fields of jobs and technology and things like that? That's my basic premise when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, and see, this is really interesting because I remember when me and you were talking, I'm like, wow, like, I swear to God, I have a mirror image of myself here, because this is the exact same way I feel in a lot of ways. It's crazy. I feel the same way. This is why people, when I say I'm conservative, they're like, oh, you don't believe in climate change. I'm like, no, I do believe climate change is happening. Mine is more on I don't necessarily believe in the urgency aspect that we're all going to, end up dying in 10 years. That's where I kind of land. It's like, I think that is definitely something to look into and invest in. And that's kind of why when we get into the meat and bones of the Green New Deal, and I look at it, is I say, some of the things I saw in it, I was like, okay, it makes sense, But then on the other ends, I don't see that. And then when I've looked at it and tried assessing how, we talk about renewable energy, I looked into how these renewable energy sources are made. And in a lot of ways, they're made almost, they're almost as bad as coal sources or non-renewables. It felt like, or yeah, renewables. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, and so yeah, so I find that we're on the same kind of wavelength as far as the climate change thing goes. I
It,
don't
it,
believe.
it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if it's happening or not. But there's a lot of I say old money because oil is an old
Mhm.
money industry, and there's a lot of people that have old money in it, and they're not ready to find new ways of making new streams of income or generating wealth. So they're gonna fight that a lot. I mean, I read or I heard on a story on the other day. It said somebody found oil and then in their backyard, and they just pay a company to come out and pump. They make like $70,000 a month.
Oh, yeah.
So like, why
Yeah.
would you want to give that up if you were lucky enough to have oil like that?
Yeah, so that's something that we would have to consider, right? And this does happen is we have to find ways to where you could put renewable energy on these people's lands and give them the same incentive as an oil company that would come in, right? Because like you were saying, it's very difficult to tell somebody who owns this tract of land, hey, we're going to take this place out of here. You're not going to get your $70,000, which they're probably relying on, right? $70,000 is a lot of money, or however much they're
Yeah.
paying these guys. Oh, she learned how to get this cone off now. Now she's like trying to go out. She's like, I figured it out. Now she's trying to take it off with every might in her power.
But
She's a
not
smart
even that.
dog.
I don't even think if the Green New Deal was enacted that really oil would be used less. Because you still need petroleum for other products like plastics and all types of things. Like
Yep.
I'm pretty sure that oil usage for like automobiles and stuff isn't that much when you look at the bigger pie of what petroleum's used for.
Yep. Well, and that's something that I found that I thought was really interesting is when I started diving into these things, and I'm like, okay, solar panels, for example. It's like people think that a solar panel just it seems this way. I know that people probably don't think of it in this much simplified way, but it does feel this way. That people think that a solar panel just comes out of thin air,
Yeah.
but they don't realize that solar panels take manufacturing processes to create the plastic or create the metal or create the stuff that creates the lithium, or not the lithium, the material that solar panels are actually made of. You know what I'm talking about. And then I was like, well, what about wind turbines? I started diving into what wind turbines are made of, and then I traced what they're made of back to the source, and it's the same process. And I'm like, so when I thought about it, I'm like, if we implemented this big old chunk at one time, how much damage would we be doing to the environment in a very short amount of time, and how detrimental would that be as opposed to slowly implementing this thing?
Yeah, I can kind of see that. But you still operate under the idea of capitalism. Like the New Deal doesn't usher any new economic change, and capitalism has a lot of bad things attached to it, like overproduction and those things that you were talking about. So of course, if we switch to other things to make the renewable stuff, and those things are maybe just as bad, that's just the inheritance of the process.
Yeah, so let me ask you: do you support or do you not support the Green New Deal, or do you support certain aspects? I don't want to necessarily put you in this like corner
So
necessarily.
the Green New Deal is just a resolution, and even if it got passed, it doesn't really do anything. It's not law. Like it doesn't tie anybody's hands to do it. All it basically does is just gives a roadmap to what we should be building towards, and whether or not they follow it is up to them anyways. So like it's not that big of a deal if it passes or not. But the idea of some of the stuff in the document are things I do think we should implement.
Could you give me a few examples of those, just so we can kind of find something there?
Yeah, let's see here.
Yeah, I gotta pull it up on my side too, so I completely
So
understand if you have to look for it.
so if you want to go to like 1C where it says states that the federal government invests in the infrastructure and industry of the United States to sustainably meet the challenges of the 21st century. I mean,
Hmm.
that's kind of already something that Trump had promised on his campaign was heavy infrastructure investment.
Yeah.
And that would create a ton of new jobs and economic growth in many rural areas of the country as well. And it also guarantees jobs to citizens to a certain extent. And I'm not very big on guaranteeing jobs to people because, taxes pay for that. And if you ever wanted to lower taxes, it'd be really hard to lower taxes when you have guaranteed jobs.
Yeah, so where do you think that these guaranteed jobs would come from? Like from the government, or would it come from? Because I've heard people when they talk about the Green New Deal, I hear them talking about how they want basically more government control over the energy market, and the government be the one to create these jobs. So are you still in favor of some capitalism kind of controlling that energy market and
Yeah.
those being the ones to create? Okay.
Yeah. Or, for example, like the infrastructure stuff. We
Mhm.
do have a lot of government organizations that handle road infrastructure and the Corps of Engineers and stuff. So we would just give the money to the local municipalities to fix their own things and their roads and hope that they spend the money like they should instead of like the federal government trying to do it all, right?
Mhm. Yeah, no, and that's something that, like, when I went through this Green New Deal, I saw there were some things that I didn't fully agree on. One of those was the light rails. Is what I tried doing. Let me kind of explain how I viewed the Green New Deal. Right, when I looked at the Green New Deal, I said, okay, this is being sold to me, the American citizen, right, as a green, right, New Deal. And so I thought climate change. The purpose of this bill is really centering around the thought of climate change. And so when I looked at all these proposed solutions, I said, how is this going to affect climate change? And when I looked at one of them, it was the light rail system. I said, how does that work? Because I know, for example, here in my town of Houston, we've had a proposed light rail to go from Houston to Dallas. Well, they're not planning on putting this down the I-45 corridor.
Yeah.
Anyone who's aware of Texas and how it works, you've got I-45 that goes
I
from
live in
Houston to
Austin.
Dallas. Oh shit! Look at there, man. Hey, so you know exactly what I'm talking about
Yeah.
then. So you know exactly what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. You don't even, yeah. So
I was actually serving on some committees at the Senate, to the Texas House and stuff
that's
when
right.
that was going on.
That's right. I forgot, anyone who in chat, by the way, I forgot, one of the many things I thought was really cool about LP over here is he served on some committees and stuff, and I thought that was fucking amazing. Uh, Not to divert the conversation, but
Yeah,
could you
yeah.
tell us a little bit like how that experience was?
So I helped staff the Senate Veteran Affairs and Border Security Committee, and it was really interesting, to say the least, because you get to learn a lot about like veteran issues. I'm a veteran, so I was heavily
Of course.
invested in that, and then also like border security. One of the big issues that came up when I was during it was the private prisons aspects of like what was going on in the private prisons. Are they spending money like they should? So like I got some behind the scenes information on that, which was awesome. But, you know, helping veterans isn't a political thing. It's just,
No.
yeah, it's not a party thing.
Yeah. No, and I thought that's really cool too. Like you were saying, I mean, there's so many topics that we could talk about tonight, right? But like, I think that's so cool is to find somebody that's actually been involved in the government of Texas, and specifically Texas. You know, Texas is such a large state. There's so many different just areas, right? We got the private prisons, which handles, I think, I want to say most of the illegal immigration that comes through the borders. I think that some local city jails actually house these illegal immigrants, but private prisons do take a good brunt of those uh, people illegally crossing. And then you also mentioned working, like, so did you actually have, like, let me ask you this, with the serving in the committee, you okay? Did you actually like, how did you get into that job? Like, how did that kind of job come to you?
So it was through like my college courses. One was at UT. It was an internship on the committee, and then
Okay.
secondly, I did a couple internships with something called the Pete Laney Center. Pete
Okay.
Laney was a Democrat Speaker of the House like 10 years or 10, 20 years ago. He's really, really famous in Texas because he was one of the few Democrats that could like reach across the aisle and get stuff moved in the House and in the Texas. And he's a phenomenal person. You can ask anybody on any side. They'll be like, Pete Laney, that dude's really good. In fact, like his head is the statue of his head is right next to the cafeteria in the Capitol because he was
Oh,
that influential. But I've served on, and then I got to know a lot of people through that partnership with him because I used his clout to get into offices and talk to people.
That's cool. That's really cool, man. I guess, and I didn't even know there was a damn cafeteria in the capital of Texas.
It's really good.
Really, I've
Yes.
never knew there was a freaking food court in there. I've been in the
Yep.
Capitol like many times now, and I've never knew that. I mean, it makes sense, but I just never knew that. I'm sure it's tucked away in one of the rooms or something like that. But
It's down in the lower floors in the Rotunda, I
ah,
think it's called, the new portion that they had built.
yeah. Oh wow. So kind of going back to the conversation with the
The
Green New
light
Deal and
rails.
stuff, the light rails. So with the light rails, so what I was going to say was they're cutting through a lot of country land is where the proposed light rail was going to go from Houston to Dallas. And so when I look at it in the lens of green, green energy and saving the planet and stuff, it's like I don't know if that would wholly save the planet. And then I also break this down. I break this climate change thing down like a lot. And it gets down to the materials. What materials are going to go into this actual light rail? What pollution is going to be caused from the actual building of these light rail systems and stuff? And
See, I think one of the premises that we'll disagree on is that the Green New Deal is solely about climate change. The New
yeah,
Deal, when it was proposed by FDR, wasn't about getting us out of the Depression. It was about trying to make the lower and middle class citizens better off, right? And the Green New Deal is supposed to mirror that type of language and that ideology. So when you say like it's only about climate change, that's why I think you might not like the light rail system, because you don't look at the other benefits that it could provide, one mainly to the people so that people could get out of poverty because they don't have to spend as much on travel, blah, 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 and all of those things. Like it's not
yeah,
just about the climate, but it's also about how to make the climate or to make the environment better at the same time while improving the lives of those that are in that environment.
yeah, and that's why I think that's my fundamental issue with the Green New Deal, right? And this is where, again, like you said, me and you are going to differ on this. Is that I think that FDR's New Deal was a New Deal, right, as opposed to this one being the Green New Deal, and that's something that I really don't like is when candidates or even AOC in this case propose something that's called the Green New Deal, and it's sold in a kind of a package that isn't really what you're getting inside of it. That's kind of something that I don't necessarily like. And I understand that this is where, that's something that I do understand. This is why getting it out, promoting it, understanding what's in it is important. It's, I guess you could say my issue is with the wording, which could be kind of petty. If I wanted to get down to the meat and bones of this, obviously I do have some issues with it. Obviously, it hits on everything that we're talking about in society today. It talks about
Yeah.
minimum wage. It talks about light rail system. It talks about what was some other things? Here it is: hourly wages. The wage gap between certain people. Yeah, 1% of earners. Large racial wealth divide, a gender earnings gap. So it covers literally anything that you've heard over the past 2 or 3 years. It covers in this thing. And so we could literally break this down and spend day by day, right?
I
Let
will
me
say
ask
though,
you.
like philosophically though, there's a reason why it does that. Because a lot of people who take on this belief about the Green New Deal and that changing all of these things that interconnect with each other will somehow bring a better outcome, it's based on this idea of like determinism, where there's free will doesn't exist in this universe, right? And that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So when something happens, it sets off a huge chain of events for eternity that we can't fix unless we somehow like make that stop. And I think that's like
Yeah.
where the Green New Deal is trying to do, is to hit all of these small areas to hopefully make a bigger impact through causing a chain of events that are positive.
Yeah, see, and this is something that I know with me, I would, when I look at this is where we're gonna get into like a little philosophy, a little bit, just a tad bit, touch the surface. Is when it comes to what you were saying, free will versus determinism. I'm more of a free will type person. That I do believe that we as humans have a free will, more free will than most, and especially here in America. I think that free will is emphasized a lot more so than other nations. So this is probably something we would disagree on, right? When it comes to the wage gap and stuff like that, I would be probably more of your bootstraps argument guy, right? Where I'd say, look, you can find another job out there, make it work kind of thing. That's very surface level, but yeah, and that's That's really interesting. I mean, let me ask you this: what if you had to pick? And I know there's a lot in the Green New Deal. If you had to pick one thing out of the Green New Deal that you said was the most appealing to you, what would that be? If you had to like, or like what general? You can give me a general idea. You don't have to be specific if you don't want to.
Oh, this is something that Andrew Yang has been talking about for a little bit on his campaign. I am really worried about the future of middle aged men who don't have college degrees and what's going to happen to their earning potential. So, when I talk about that, one of the first things that pops up is truckers. And AI is coming. You can't stop it. And it's not necessarily a bad thing if we plan for it. And one of the biggest things about the Green New Deal is it hits a lot about how to make jobs and things for people who will be disadvantaged by the coming technology. You can't get around it. And if we don't figure out what to do with like the trucking industry and how we're going to help all these truckers find jobs, we're going to be in the same problem that we are similar to the coal industry in Virginia and stuff. When all those coal places went out of business, those middle-aged men that only have like a high school degree probably that were making 60, 70,000 dollars a year, they're now going to go back to making like minimum wage.
Yeah, and let me ask you about that with minimum wage. What do you think about minimum wage? How it is now, as far as because I know certain states do have their own minimum wage. Do you believe that minimum wage should be handled at the federal level or at the state level?
I think it should be handled at both. I think that the federal level should act just like kind of like the Constitution, where it grants basic human rights, and one of those should at least be the ability to live on some wages earned, and that price level would be like the lowest ever, right? And then states can build on top of that based upon their rate their living expenses and stuff. It costs more to live in California versus Wyoming, so
Yeah.
obviously they would need different wages from the state level. But at a federal level, I think we should still have a bare minimum, unless we can do something similar to, like, I think it's Switzerland or Sweden, where they don't have a minimum wage, but they have incredibly strong unions that negotiate for their high wages. So there's no minimum wage, but the workers all have incredibly high wages because their unions are incredibly powerful. So I could go either way.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, with me, I mean, obviously, there's gonna be some kind of federal. I would say with that, mine would be more on the like you were kind of saying, it'd be a little bit more on the very, very bottom of the totem pole. It would be something that, honestly, I think I definitely can look at the trend of. I've looked at the trend before of minimum wage, and I think this is something that maybe a lot of my conservative friends would disagree with me on. Is that I think that it has been pretty still for the past several years. Now, do I think it
More
should
than
go up to 15?
several.
Yeah, it's been, I think, like, what was it, 2008, 2009, I think was the last time we
I
saw
don't
him.
even remember, but because of inflation, it's already eaten most of that.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, with the minimum wage, it's like I think it could be increased, and it probably should be probably, but I wouldn't say it up to 15. I would say probably like $8 an hour, or maybe 8.25. 8.25 seems to be kind of the going rate, anyways, for a lot of these jobs, even in retail, which is where a lot of these minimum wage jobs are being held. I don't know if you agree or disagree with that, so I want to give you a chance to, if you want to
Yeah.
rebut that. Okay.
So I would be more along the lines of like a $9 or $10 somewhere. You would think about the most rural place in America and what you would need to kind of live there, and then maybe add 10 to 20% to that. That way, it doesn't kneecap larger states or smaller states from being able to pay something that somebody could at least live on. And when I say living wage, I don't mean living wage in just California. That a living wage in California is a lot different than a living wage in out in the middle of nowhere, Texas, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's exactly why I sat there and, like, kind of like you were saying with the state level of minimum wages. I think that minimum wage at a state level just makes the most sense. And I took a look and I looked at all the different, wages that are at the state level. And I was actually quite surprised. There's actually a few states out there that still have the federal level as their state level. But those federal levels, it was really interesting. And this is a correlation, not a causation. But I noticed that a lot of these seem to have been the big farm states. I think I saw Wyoming or Idaho or something like that. The ones that are very, like I said, rural. You don't really have much cities and all this other stuff. You got most farmland.
Because you got to think of a local store owner. If they don't get a lot of traffic and they make just enough to stay in business, then minimum wage is probably all that they can pay, and it's probably all that anybody needs to survive on in that small area. If you don't have a Target in your town or a Walmart in your town, how much economic activity is really coming out there, right? You can't expect small business owners to pay something that they can't.
Oh, exactly. And that's the other thing too, when we talk about let me ask you this, because this has been kind of sitting on my mind, not to draw this conversation back to the AI. Are you a Yang Gang or
I like a lot of I'm a Bernie supporter.
Bernie? Okay.
I do like Bernie a lot, but Andrew Yang has, regardless of whether anybody votes for him, the things that he's brought to the table are incredibly unique and something that we should have been talking about like 10 years ago. And I appreciate the conversations that he's having around the AI realm, because nobody else is really talking about it. They're all Bernie Sanders. There's some things I don't like about him, his protectionist policies, and like this thing where he thinks that America is not going to change much. I don't know. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to explain why I have my love-hate relationship with him.
No, it's okay. And I say we agreed to talk about the Green New Deal and climate change. So forgive me if we're going off on these tangents here.
This is a natural conversation.
Yes, exactly. So what Journey said is really interesting. He talked about minimum wage in Seattle and how they increased it to $15 an hour. Cost of living exceeded the increase in 2 years. The result was the people who are making between $15 to $20 are now considered working for poverty rates. And so with that being said, I think that this is something I hear a lot of, is that people will say, well, look, Seattle did it and they're doing fine. My argument that I say against that is that it seems like, at least, that it's in a very confined bubble, and really whereas other companies can still outsource their vendors and stuff like that to other cities that aren't paying $15 an hour, whereas the people who are really getting affected are the people that are living and working in Seattle, because the jobs are going to move out and all this other stuff. Plus, they're getting their part-time stuff.
It's possible that they could move out. To say that you're going to pick up a ginormous company and move out because you have to pay $1 to $2 more, I don't see many companies doing that. It just doesn't. It's kind of stupid. And obviously, they're in Seattle for a reason, because Seattle's probably giving them huge tax breaks to be there or whatever. So they chose Seattle for a reason. There's a reason why they're there.
Sure. And it could be a bunch of different reasons, right? Toxic says something that's really interesting here, and I think this is something I've been preaching about in my chat, is my feeling of Bernie or bust, essentially. My feeling is that you would probably vote for Yang if they screwed. Well, if they they probably Yang ain't gonna get the nomination at this point. So right now it looks like it's either gonna be Bernie or Biden, maybe Warren, but if the DNC screws Bernie over again, will you? Well, you probably won't vote for Trump, I would imagine. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay.
No. So it's not I'm going to vote for the Democrat because I'm Democrat. I'm going to vote for the person who I know is going to more likely align with my policy views than Trump. There's maybe 2 or 3 things Trump proposes that I agree about. And then the rest of it, it's just a downhill wrecking ball for me.
I will say, somebody with the name Lefty Philosophy, I would not have thought I would have agreed more with. It's really interesting, because I'm so used to talking with people on Twitch specifically, where if they've got the name Lefty in their name, I'm expecting to have a full-on conversation with somebody that's about to talk about communism and socialism and all this stuff. Well, socialism is a little bit different.
Yeah.
But
I'm
I
glad you
mean,
can make that distinction. Thank you.
yes. Well, they definitely lie on different parts of the spectrum, if you want to put it that way. But I know some people that are for socialism that aren't for communism and
Yeah.
stuff. I've heard people make the argument on the right that say socialism leads to communism is what I've heard of, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, what is just really interesting to have hear you, someone with the name Lefty, say that Trump had two good things in his thing. I was like, wow.
I'm gonna be honest. Like, there's no way that I can look at a candidate and be like, "There's not one thing I'll ever agree with you on," and I have to be able to admit that because, like, if you say you're against building the infrastructure and stuff like that, like, what? Our infrastructure's crumbling right now. I don't care if I don't like Trump, but if he's gonna invest in the infrastructure, I have to say that's a good idea.
Yeah, and to respond to heavy fisted, I've probably seen a few of these before, heavy. In regards to how Seattle's handling minimum wage, it's kind of like this little example right now that we've kind of got going on in our country. Seattle's kind of becoming the experiment, so to speak. But no, man, that's awesome, and that's something that I admire a lot. To say I'm shocked is an understatement because
and I will say, like, my name is Lefty Philosophy, and the philosophy part is really important to me, and that's why I come at certain topics different ways than most leftists because they think purely from like a political standpoint. I'm about the philosophy of things. So like when I pointed out that I know that me and you don't agree on free will and determinism, I know how I can talk to you though without like putting you in a bad situation or something like that so that we can have an honest conversation.
No, and I appreciate it. And you know, I think that it's nice to hear somebody though that's on the left that sits there and says, "Hey, there's a couple of things that are, you know," it's kind of refreshing in a way to hear you say, "Hey, look, Trump's done a couple of good things. Granted, he's not done a lot, and that's fair. That's completely fair. Yeah. But to hear you at least admit one or two things, that's amazing."
I mean, prison reform, the stuff he signed on prison reform, like we've been trying to do some of these things for years, and regardless of how small of an impact it may have had or whatever, he still did something about prison reform. I can say that aligns with something that I agree with.
Yeah, and that's something that's and like I said, because most of the people that I've ever interacted with on Twitch, and I don't know how much you've perused through Twitch. I know you came into my chat and, you know, but I know many people on the left that'll sit there and, you know, just you mention Trump and they freaking squeal. Like they'll squeal and run off like, hell no, I ain't going near Trump. But to hear you, it's a breath of fresh air. I tell you what.
Well, because I take you at good faith, and hopefully you take me at good faith.
Oh, absolutely. I'm like I said, it's like I'm like, holy hell, where have you been for my conversation?
Yeah, but I mean, like most people you talk to who are Trumpers or supporters, they don't take you in good faith, and it really wears out on people when you just can't have a normal conversation in good faith. Like, I know you're probably not a racist, and you may have said something that may have been racist or whatever, but like I should take that into account that maybe you don't know that it is, or maybe you just don't see how it plays out.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Is I think that conversations have become so volatile just lately outside of the Twitch realm. Twitch is even more so because, you know, some people are trying to shill, some people are trying to, you know, grift.
Yeah.
But you've got people, especially in our society now, where people are just butting heads and think that the opposite side is like the other football team, right? Like, I'm never going to root for the Patriots. I'm never going to root for the Democrats. Like, I wish that things would change up a little bit here. But I'm glad that you see that with good faith, because I see the same thing here, man. I think me and you are having an awesome conversation. Granted, we've been like sitting here gloating about each other for the past 10 minutes, but I'm telling you, it is quite a breath of fresh air. So to bring this a little bit back to the minimum wage here, I see the chat is like going nuts over this minimum wage thing. Sledge, welcome on in, buddy. Glad to have you in here. Sledge is an awesome guy. Minimum wage, have you what let me ask you this, what do you think are the pros and the cons? Because I think this is the other thing that when I try to have conversations with people is I want to see if there are any cons that they could see to raising the minimum wage. Do you see any cons that could come from that?
Yeah, and then, like I said, it could hurt a lot of rural communities that just can't pay for it. And it's not their fault that nobody drives out there and spends money or something like that. It's they have to have services in rural areas and they might not make a lot of money. It's that's just the way it is. It's kind of like the thing about when we electrified the South in I think the 60s or whatever. They couldn't afford to get electricity, but we went ahead and made sure that they could get electricity, and it really helped them out.
Yeah, and what Sledge said is kind of what I'm of the opinion of, right? Is that kind of if you have skills, you can demand the wage you deserve. You want to make more money, you train your skills. And I think this is something too in our labor market that we don't really see a lot of, is that a lot of people don't really realize that you yourself in this kind of a market, you are the product to a company. Some people don't really see that value. They see that, and I get why, but when you go to a company, it's a relationship between you and the company. You are offering your skills, your services to this company for a set rate, right? And if you go to this thing, I know this is an anecdote here, but I've done this before where I've worked at a company I was making like 18 an hour, and I had a job, had no need to really leave it. And a company a staffing agency came to me and they said, "Hey, we've got an opportunity for you. It'll pay anywhere between 20 and 23 an hour. What do you want us to put you in at?" Well, I got a job. I have nothing to lose. So I said, put me in at 23 an hour. Hell, screw it. I mean, And sure enough, they came back and said, "We want you for 23." I said, "Well, I'll be fucking damned." So, yeah, I thought that this is kind of the interesting example here is that when you have a job where where you already have a job, you have that leverage. Worst case scenario, they come back and say, "We don't want you for 23. We want you for 20. Well, I was making 18, so even then it's still a pay raise. Granted, it was temp, and long story short, they ended up, ironically, as I'm conservative, they ended up shipping my job off overseas. Yeah, so I was laid off. I ironically sat here and bragged about everything and just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I was without a job luckily, I found a job within 3 days. Luckily, but it could have been much worse.
Yeah, it's
but
not the story for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's not, and I recognize that. But I also think that. Let me ask you this: what do you think about? Where does your extent of free will kind of go? Like, do you believe that? Do you believe in a little bit of the bootstraps argument? Do you kind of believe that it's not really that efficient, or?
So even under a deterministic frame or a thought process, bootstraps would still happen, right? Because everything that you've been experienced or subjected to in your life made you be that bootstrap type person. And you really couldn't change that because maybe your dad taught you those things. Your mom taught you. You were reinforced through the media and the books you read, the school you went to. And it all created this bootstrap mentality on top of your genetics, your wealth, and the things that you had available outside of your network, right?
Yeah.
However, for another person that grew up in a different environment, it's not that they don't choose to necessarily be not bootstrapping. They don't get it as an option or something. You know what I'm saying?
I think I know what you're saying. In other words, it's kind of like it seems like a little bit of an argument of opportunity, right? In other words, that my opportunity would have been a little bit better because of the things that I was probably afforded versus somebody who's in poverty and doesn't really have all these different options at their disposal.
And granted, people do come out of the ghettos and make it big and stuff like that, but those stories are few and far between. For the majority, it's not like that.
And this is where, like, I've tried thinking of solutions, right? And that is trying to find how do we encourage these people that are in these kind of things to come out of their situation, right? How do we try to say, hey, there you go. I like it. This man coming out with the bam. Yeah, no. Well, me personally, I think that the Green New Deal tries to. I don't want to say it, but it kind of feels almost like the government is the one that's trying to lift them up, is the way I get from that. And in all intents and purposes, it kind of is that way, considering that it's a government bill that's kind of trying with that intent. You know what
Yeah,
I mean?
hold on. And this is another difference in premise that we have, right? So I notice a lot with conservatives and people on the right. They
Mm-hmm.
see the government as this separate entity that exists and breathes without them, right? I don't see it as that. I see it as we the people, of the people, for the people, right? So when people talk about the government, what I see is a collective of the majority voice that votes in America, right? So it's like the I don't know if you've probably never read the Leviathan. It's a staple political philosophy book, but it's that when we collectively come together, we form an entity that is bigger than ourselves, that has its own mindset, sort of, that we can't necessarily control. But it's through our collectivity that that mindset has come from. So you can change the individuals to change the bigger entity, but the bigger entity can't really change the individuals as much.
Yeah. Well, and so Sledge, that's actually something like I said that I've been kind of agreeing with is that I definitely think that you can. I'm big in saying that you definitely can, right? I definitely acknowledge that there are definitely different circumstances between my growing up and their growing up. I understand they've got a lot more challenges. This is something that I've preached about constantly, is that I think that there is, just because there's more walls doesn't mean you can't do it. It takes a little bit more effort, takes a little bit more strength, it takes a little bit more, you could say free will, I guess, or right, that willpower to get through it all. Um,
See, but where does that willpower come from? If you didn't know that that willpower existed, or that idea, then how could you use it?
well, and that's what I was going to say too, with where my solution came from, was that I think that there should be some kind of motivating factor of maybe examples of these people that, for example, these people that have come out of, I guess you could say, these poor areas, have them come back into these poor areas and promote them, their entrepreneurial spirit, maybe, something like that. You try to inject this spirit into these people, right? You got to try to find ways to kind of motivate them as best as possible. When you've got a really shitty situation, it's really easy to, if you're in a shitty situation, you got 5 other people around you that are also in a shitty situation, it's real easy for you to get dragged into a shitty situation. Whereas if you have somebody that comes into that shitty situation and you sit there and talk to them, you say, hey, look, I came out of it. Maybe that's that one thing that person needed to be motivated, right?
It could.
Whereas I think that instead of just, it's kind of like when you hand somebody, exactly, heavy, you can lead it to force water, you can't make them drink. And that's the thing I think about with the specifically, to bring it back to the Green New Deal, is I think where I think me and you talked about disagreeing is that I think that if you hand these people, for example, hand them money essentially, right? I don't know if that would necessarily lead to the outcomes that we're hoping they would come to, is where I think is. And I don't know if that would, just because you artificially lift them out of poverty by saying, hey, we're giving them money, they should come out of it. It's like, I don't know if I would buy that.
But what if you gave them money and then they generated wealth from that?
Well, wealth is a very interesting word, isn't it?
Yes.
It's a very interesting word. Wealth
Because
can mean a lot.
that's why. And I when I tackle socioeconomic issues, I look at wealth.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily look at pay or all those other things. I look at the broader picture, which is wealth.
So wealth can mean a number of things, which is why I say it's a really interesting word. Wealth can lead to, uh, oh, that's a good point, Sledge, and we'll get to that in a second. So wealth can be if you go and buy I know it's going to sound kind of funny, but you go and buy an Xbox, right? Not saying that you could buy this with the government money, but hey, look, anything's possible out there, right? And so let's say you went and got an Xbox. Well, you've just gained wealth, essentially. That's kind of like an asset to you that you could sell if you wanted to. Granted, it would probably be a little less than what you bought it for, but it's still wealth in some aspects. Wealth can also mean the general broad term of maybe a better home, which I would say, and depending on what you do, whether you rent, if you're renting, you're losing money. If you're buying, you're making money, essentially, depending on what area you get it in. If you buy a home in a poor area, and you know how the real estate market works.
But that's only if houses actually continue to hold value and increase in their
Yeah,
Their
depending on
value.
where you're at, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, I mean, if you go to somewhere where it's in the poorest area of towns, chances are that home value is going to go down. But to answer what Sledge said real quick, not to kind of divert this conversation over there, you're right. Actually, Sledge is honestly, you're right. I think sports is a big thing, and we see this too a lot. Actually, I believe in these poorer areas, typically these coaches, you hear hell a lot of these sports players that come out of these areas will say and talk about their coaches that were they had in high school and talk about the coaches that they had in middle school and elementary school and how they made them the man they are today. And that's something to drive home about, Sledge. Actually, you're absolutely right there.
Was it really just boils down to having a positive influence in your life that some of these kids just may have not had at home?
And I think that's possible. I think, and this is the other thing too, is I think that's something we have to look at, right? And this is a correlation. It doesn't mean it's causation, but we can look at and say, well, do the suburban areas that the typical middle American family, do they have a typical structure in the household, right? A mother, a father figure, not a disgruntled household. Maybe you have parents that aren't living in poverty. The parents are making 60, 70,000. And do these people that are living in poverty, do they come from a separated household, which I believe it's correct. Statistically, I think this is correct. I could be wrong, but I believe I've seen this before, where typically poorer households have higher rates of divorces and can't think of the word. It's like separate families.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that plays a factor in it too. And I don't think that's something that necessarily the government could come in and fix either, other than try to fill that void. And even then, it doesn't mean that it's going to actually do what it's intended to
So
do.
like, there are things the government can do, right? That can help those things. And one of the things is, I've recently heard a really good argument from Bo the Fifth Column about reparations for Black people and African Americans, right? Like, reparations is an interesting idea. Not to give every African American money, right? But to create a government program in which we invest like $10 million, right? And then we hand out loans, interest-free loans to African Americans to buy houses or to start businesses. And then that money goes back into that coffer when they're done with it, and it keeps growing this fund.
Yeah, see that I've never been a big fan of that. That one's kind of like if I was to say and put my foot down and say I definitely don't agree. I don't necessarily agree with the idea of reparations. I get it's in good intentions, and this is the thing too when we talk about politics. I keep diverting these conversations. I definitely think that a lot of these are meant in goodwill. I think that they definitely like a lot of the people that are proposing these have good intentions and good hearts. I just think that at the end of the day, I don't necessarily. I think there's more problems than there are. I guess you could say solutions to these, especially with the reparations thing. We get into a whole slew of things that are just questionable, and that's why. And it's got a long way to go before it's even in consideration in my thing.
Yeah, but I mean, like in general, like the idea of reparations is to right a wrong in which one class or race of people have benefited greatly monetarily, which allowed them to get more wealth to seize a little bit more power. Because wealth allows you to buy power in many areas of the country, not just political, but local, community, everything around it. And when I look at it from that stance, that wealth is something that is generational, it's passed on from generation to generation. You may not inherit wealth, but normally, if you are in a middle class, you will die in the middle class, statistically speaking. And if you're in the lower class, you're probably going to die in the lower class. And if you're in the upper class, that's where you'll stay.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, because we have a few. I do have a few good questions from chat here. Sledge said at 10 to 11 they know right and wrong, and he said if they keep making stupid choices, when do we start blaming them for their choices instead of making excuses?
So I don't believe that there shouldn't be punishments for anything, right? Because punishments actually help as a deterrent, which would be one of those factors that play into the determinist theory. Like if I knew I was going to jail for life for killing somebody, the fact that that is a law and that will be the consequence will guide my judgment on whether or not I'll do that. So they're still having those in effect and still punishing people. I still feel will help.
Yeah, and what's your to kind of go off of what Grillo said here? Grillo said something that's really interesting. I remember seeing this before. What's your opinion on have you heard of the three biggest indicators about getting out of poverty before?
Uh, I mean, there's a lot, but what
Uh,
three in particular?
it, it's Grillo said them in the chat. It's graduate high school, don't have kids before marriage, and get full time employment.
Yeah,
What do you think about that?
it's pretty basic because
Yeah,
what was the first one? Graduate high school. And
yeah, graduate
people
high school.
statistically who don't graduate high school don't make a lot of money because not everybody can be
Yeah,
a Mark Zuckerberg or whatever,
yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
Don't get married. What?
Don't have kids before marriage.
Don't have kids before marriage is pretty tricky, but I understand why because it puts a lot
Yep.
of stress on economically on people. So when you have a single parent and a single child, the person who has full custody of they're going to be at an economic disadvantage because they have to invest a lot of their resources in a child. And then the other one
Yeah.
was,
Get full time employment, which that one I agree with hundred
yeah,
and
I
ten
mean,
percent.
what else would you do though? Like just work part time? It's fucking weird.
Yeah, hey, people, hey, look. So this is the really interesting thing. I'm glad you say this because when I looked at the statistics for minimum wage, part time employment made up a large portion of that. Actually, there were still full time employees. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah.
most of them were part time, and I was like, that's really interesting. Just
But
thought it was,
why are they only working part time though? That's a question.
that's a
Because if they're a
that's a
single
big question.
parent and they can only work part time, then that's totally understandable. Like they're not working part time because they want to sit at home and play video games.
Yeah. Um. So Sledge here said, yeah, I think he was referring to Grillo's comment of 50,000 new millionaires every year in the USA. And Sledge said, yeah, my last spotter got both his legs blown off and he didn't make excuses. Now he's a millionaire. Sledge, for your kind of background as well. Sledge was in the military. I don't want to get his background wrong, so forgive me, Sledge, if I forgot which branch he served in and stuff like that, but it's neither here nor there. And
Hopefully, he
so
wasn't a crayon eater. I'm just joking.
Sledge, to kind of give you a little bit of background on Lefty philosophy, because he came in here. I don't know how long you've been in here or not and everything. Lefty was also in the military as well and uh, did served and everything. So it's and a Purple Heart recipient too. So that was pretty cool. But as far as how is it tricky, don't run around sticking your dick in everything that moves. Yeah, the kids before marriage thing, man. This is why when people say like I've I'm poor and I've got kids. This goes back to what we were talking a little bit about with the single parent households and stuff. It's like I think that Sledge is very blunt with it, but in a lot of ways, that's that kind of decision making you make. I understand it's difficult as fuck. I get it,
But
but
then again, like you're also trying to impose like your values on somebody else that like, why what I just let people do what they want. Everybody makes
yeah,
mistakes, man, and we should be there for each other as a community to help each other when we make mistakes and not just always have to like point the finger and wag. Cuz like that shit doesn't work, man. You either make them like even worse off because you're shaming and pitying them and they're going to take it the wrong way, or you just have this callous type society.
freaking Levo in chat. Can you see chat or no?
No, I can't. I don't know how to
Oh
do it.
man,
Hold on.
let's just say he said he found a way to work around not having kids.
Oh my god. Hey, I have a vasectomy now because I have 3 kids, and I was like, oh, that's
Oh
enough.
man,
That's enough. Hey, but let me tell you, man,
yeah,
kids, when you have them and when you see,
yeah.
does everybody know that about your situation?
Oh, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. Everybody knows
So
about it. Yeah, no, it's
when
out of the
you see
bag.
when you see your child for the first time,
Mhm.
I swear to you, dude, you will feel this instant connection. And if you don't, there's something wrong. Not necessarily with the mother
No, yeah,
because of
of
postpartum depression and all that
course,
shit,
of
but
course.
like you will feel something you've never felt before in your life, dude.
Oh, dude.
It brought me to
Mhm.
tears when I saw both of my children for the
Wow.
first time. It was like this instant, like if there was a grenade, I'd already jumped on it. And I just looked at you, right? It's
Yeah.
weird. And this
Yeah.
connection with people with their kids, man, that's something we should want to foster. And kids bring out a
Yep.
lot of good stuff in us.
I absolutely agree, and that's something that my wife, she's I think she's gonna be 14 weeks this Saturday, so she's almost out of the first trimester, and this is the crazy thing. After about 4 or 5 weeks, when we got our first ultrasound done, I heard the heartbeat, and that was when I broke down in tears. Was hearing the heartbeat, I lost my freaking mind. And then it's even more crazy because like I had another surreal moment when, as the baby's gotten older, I've seen that it's actually developed into like an actual, like you can see the hands, the legs, and everything in the face. It's like, and then it's at that age and its development where it's like it's moving around and stuff. And I'm sitting here like watching this thing move around in my wife's belt. I'm like, holy crap! Like I can already feel that feeling that you're talking about. I can already start to feel it because I've started thinking about it, and every time I think about it, I'm already, like you said, ready to jump on a grenade for this baby, and it's not even born yet, and I'm already feeling this way.
Yeah. So I mean, as long as the kids grow up in a loving home or something like that, man, I'm all for people having kids. I think it really
Yeah,
makes some people better human beings. I mean, obviously, some fucking people are just really terrible.
yeah, yeah.
But
It's unfortunate.
yeah,
It's unfortunate, but man, look, it's been a really good, awesome, wholesome conversation with you, man, and it's been really cool to interact with chat, man. I think me and you have one hell of a connection that I didn't think. And forgive me for when we first met, when you came in my chat. I've seen what happens when you have like some kind of non-filters
yeah,
with people that come and say, "Hey, let me in your chat." I kid you not, I've been the victim now of 2 trolls, and one of them was hella aggressive. Okay, like he was streaming my stream, and then when I banned him because he was saying some crazy crap in my chat, I watched him on stream, restreaming my stream and talking shit about me and saying, "Oh, here's another lefty liberal blah blah." I'm like, I'm on the fucking right, but okay. And so that was really funny to see that. But I definitely encourage you, man, to come back on.
yeah.
Another thing is I highly encourage you, if you're around, check out some other cool people like Killer Steven. I don't know if you've seen him around or not. Check him out on Twitch. He does an open roundtable on Fridays. I promise you, I know you're a busy man, but if you have the time, I highly recommend you stop into his channel during these open roundtables and try to jump on in and chime in and stuff. You'd be a fucking perfect fit. It'd be really entertaining.
That'd be awesome,
But beware, if you're looking for a wholesome conversation, this one's a little bit more on the entertainment side, so you might have a little bit more of an aggressive panel versus our conversation here. But
Sorry, it's
definitely,
different
man.
people, man. I was in the military for like 4.5
Yeah.
years.
Oh man,
So
I missed what you said. What branch you served in? Which branch was it you
the
served in
Army.
again? The Army. Okay, nice. I know. I'm telling you, were you born in? Were you born and raised in Texas or
Mm-mm. I've been
no?
here since 2011.
Oh, okay. What made you want to move to Texas? Like out of all the places.
I got out of the military in Washington State, and then my stepdad was in the military and stationed here, and then my family was here. I just came down and visited for like 2 weeks, and I was like, you know what? I don't feel like going back to where I was. I may never ever get out of that cycle again. I'll just start community college here.
Yeah, nice. And then you graduated from UT, which is. Did you get a not to poke too personal here, and feel free not to answer if you don't want to. What kind of degree did you get?
I have
If you
a
don't mind me asking.
bachelor's in government, specifically in political philosophy, and a minor in business.
Nice business and at UT.
Hmm.
Even if that's a minor, that's a big deal, especially coming from UT. UT is one of the best business schools in the country, I believe, actually.
And I took a lot of business ethic courses in that strain. So I was very interested in ethics and business relations.
Yeah. Damn, man. Well, congratulations on all those achievements, man. You've had a hell of a freaking story to tell, man, and it's amazing. Definitely would like to have you back on at another
Yeah.
point in time, and maybe we can have a more deeper conversation. I know our conversations were all over the place today.
That's because we
Of
were trying to figure out, where we are
course,
in certain realms so that when we
of
ask
course.
a question, you can be like, I know how he thinks about this, so
Yeah.
I guess he thinks this way or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're gonna go ahead and do, guys, is we're gonna start wrapping up the podcast here. You know how it is. We do 1 hour typically for every podcast. be on the lookout. We're going to do something on Wednesdays and Saturdays coming up soon. I'm going to try to arrange some guests, and we're going to do Wednesdays, we're going to do live streams on YouTube. And then Saturdays, we're going to do live streams on Facebook. So they're going to be a little bit mixed up. I'm not going to do a multi-stream, so you won't see me on Twitch on those days. Those are going to be strictly YouTube and Facebook days. So keep an eye out for that, guys, as I work on those details. And I'm going to, as I work on these particular channels, I'm actually going to bring in streamers from those platforms. So when you go to YouTube, you're going to get a streamer that's also from YouTube. You're not going to get them from Twitch and a crossover from Twitch onto YouTube, if that makes sense. But anyways, guys, go check out Lefty Philosophy on YouTube, exactly like it's spelt, I believe, in the chat. We're going to go ahead and raid another great, awesome guy. You would like him, Lefty Philosophy, as well. His name is Loyal Logic. Pretty cool guy, pretty chill guy. He does some roundtables as well. Me and him are working on doing a collab. But yes, guys, go follow my man Lefty Philosophy. He's also on Twitter. You should see it in the timer pane. I don't know if it popped up or not, but go give him a follow. Any last words you want to say, Lefty Philosophy, before we go?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. It's been great, and I really, really think we should do some more stuff together.
Absolutely, man. And so let's go ahead and raid. Gotta run and mod for Middle America and have a good night. Heavy Fisted. All right, Heavy Fisted. Have a good night, man. All right, so we're going to go ahead and raid Loyal Logic. We're at 10 seconds here.